Hello, my name is Ken McGowan. I'm an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. I'm interviewing Samuel McGowan on Monday, October 23rd, 2006 at the Pleasant Ridge Branch Library. Our camera operator today is David Dukart. Mr. McGowan, I noticed from your biographical form that you were born in 1923, and my quick calculations determined that at the time of Pearl Harbor you would have been on or about 18 years old.
Your calculations are correct.
Can you tell us what your experiences were of that day, Pearl Harbor?
My recollection of the Pearl Harbor day is we were at Carroll Park in Baltimore, Maryland. We were at a football game. We were not playing, but we were we were on the outside of the cable when the word came, and it was sort of, they weren't sure what had happened, but it had Pearl Harbor, and they were short on really information, and that's really all I recall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you recall in the days and the weeks to come, could you describe the feeling of people around you, of neighbors and friends in the communities, the country, what the feeling was?
Well, of course, outrage at what had happened, and the more information that came in, the more outraged they were when you saw pictures of the Arizona and the other big ships upside down and whatnot. But it was more surprise and outrage than anything. I think because it's hard to comprehend suddenly waves and waves of planes coming in and bombing boats that are tied up and whatnot. And it took a while, I think, for people to really realize what happened and the extent of damage it did. And I think shock was probably the single most common reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. Things that I read in history suggest that the isolationist sentiment in the United States before Pearl Harbor was still very, very strong.
Oh, yeah.
Before Pearl Harbor. Do you remember that feeling, that sentiment pretty well disappeared, or was there still some of that feeling lingering?
No, my personal experience was that was the end of the isolation program, that we're going to have a big invisible wall around this country, and what happened in other places. We realized that the wall was breached, and no one would have conceived that this country was attacked the way it was. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much it.
Do you remember that there was any sentiment that perhaps in the war we should be fighting the Japanese first, as opposed to what was our policy, Europe first? I'm
trying to think. At 18, you don't have very deep thought.
Sure.
You react more than anything else. No, I can't say that I do recall. Mostly within your own age group, it was, what are we going to do? Just sit around and let other people fight or whatever, and that was probably the biggest problem to be solved. What could the people as individuals do about it? Mm-hmm. And then along came the draft, and in my case, I had, they called a lazy eye, and I was 4F or something like that. And all of a sudden, all the fellows I played ball with and everything, they were all gone. Mm-hmm. And not that there's anything wrong with having your pick of a lot of girls around, but anyways, he'd like to go out with a fellow once in a while. And I kept going up to the draft board, and finally got them to swing around, and then they drafted me.
So you were drafted, I think I saw on here, you were drafted in 1944.
Right.
After the war began in 41.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do in the meantime?
Well, I worked for the railroad, and we own a marine terminal next to Fort McHenry in Baltimore, and it was the foreign freight department, and what they did was handle merchandise that would come in box cars and whatnot to be unloaded and transloaded onto ocean vessels. Some would go out to the coast of like Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans, others out to the coast through the canal, and also overseas. Well, when Pearl Harbor came along, shortly after that, the government took over all the boats. So we sort of sat around playing battleship chess for a while there until they found out what we could be doing. And then we got identification cards from the Coast Guard and whatnot. And that was pretty much what we did. Let's see, I went in 41, 44, and stayed working with the railroad until, as I say, until I got drafted and away I went.
Okay, can you describe those initial experiences with the selective service system and induction, how that went? Was that in Baltimore?
Oh, yes. Baltimore was big enough, I guess, to merit. I don't know what it was in other cities around the country. But they were taking people, and after I got into service, they got people with glass eyes, and I was wondering why I had a push to get in because I had a lazy eye. But mostly it was concerned with the fellows that were signing up, getting drafted and going, and the word normal life stopped. It wasn't normal anymore. Everything had changed. You weren't the people that you're used to being with and whatnot. They were gone. And you had family. There were 4 of us, 4 McGowans that went in, 3 came out. And that was really it, concern with the people that you were close to, and suddenly they were all in defense jobs or in the service.
Okay. Do you remember basic training?
Oh, yeah. Took basic training in, let me think here. Basic training was in a Signal Corps camp in Camp Crowder, Missouri, where I learned to be a radio operator. Then I went from there to Fort Jackson. They had 2 organizations that they were forming. They were called SIM companies. It stood for Signal Information and Monitoring Company. And the idea was that you took a bunch of railroad signal operators, learned how to operate radios, high speed, and the theory was that you could then have a group of radiomen at each headquarters, so that technically it would be the people at the top in Washington or wherever their headquarters was had access right to the battlefront, because you had qualified people at each level. And there were only 2 such companies, the 3322nd and the 3324th. And I was in the 3322nd, and we were out in Seattle, Washington, when VJ Day occurred. I don't know, they didn't know what to do with us, so we wound up in Okinawa, which was one of the longer trips, not going, but coming back it was. I'm jumping ahead, but when we came back, I had brought a prisoner back, and he was supposed to go to McNeil Island in Seattle. And I'm trying to think. I was working at the Inspector General's office at the time, and a fellow worked it so I could bring a prisoner back, which meant on a troop ship, I had the entire cul-de-sac, which was the strong room, it was called. You got a mattress and a couple of sergeants. And I brought him back, and we were to go, at that time, to dock at the West Coast. And I thought, well, that'll be easy. I'll just take him up there to Seattle.
And this was after VJ Day?
Yeah, oh, yeah. And after we had been on Okinawa, and we're on the way back. So I'm trying to think. It was on the way back. Instead of going to the West Coast, there was a railroad strike, and the troop ship with me and a bunch of other fellows on came. They went from Okinawa to Pearl Harbor, and Pearl Harbor down through the canal and up to New York. And here I'm landing in New York. I'm from Baltimore, and I've got to go all the way out to Seattle. And fortunately, I went to the commanding officer there at Governor's Island, and he said, "Would you like to take the prisoner off your hands?" I said, "I would love it." And so they took him, and I got assigned to a military police company just for paperwork, and I got a 3-day pass. And the day, I was one of the few people I know that the day I got back from overseas, I got home, because I jumped on a train and went down.
Yes.
Yeah, I even got caught in one of those turnstiles for the subway.
Well, You described in, talking about from basic training on, and you talking over a period of a couple of years, quite a bit of physical movement from city to city in different parts of the United States. Prior to your service in the military, had you traveled extensively?
No, the only thing that would qualify as travel, in the year that I went to work for the railroad, I found out I got a week's vacation with less than a year's service, and my oldest brother and I went to Atlantic City, and then we went from Atlantic City to Ocean City, Maryland, and that was about the only traveling that I had done. And the first time I'd ever flown in an airplane was when I got back to Baltimore, was discharged, and I had a sister, my only sister in Pittsburgh, and she had a baby. And that was my first time I flew. I went back and found out the baby, and I could get him quiet. I don't know whether he had colic or what, but her husband came home one night, and he comes in, and I'm laying on the bed, and I got this little baby like this, and we're both sound asleep. And he said, "How do you do that?"
So I'm guessing that for probably most people in the military, their prior experience with travel was pretty limited.
Oh,
and
yeah.
now, all of a sudden, they're traveling not only over the whole United States, they're traveling all over the world. How did that affect you? How do you think that affected other people?
I think the biggest effect was the fact that people who lived in farms, because they're people who lived in farms and historically that's all they read, they found out suddenly there was an ocean out there were countries, different people, different ideas and whatnot. And I think it did more to acquaint people who normally would spend one generation after another in the same spot, probably not move more than 50 miles from where they were born. And all of a sudden, waterfront property became expensive, or people liked it, that normally would never have experienced it. And I think that was the chief thing. It just, you got to aware of the fact that what was going on in the rest of the world. So I guess you say the world started getting smaller. Yeah.
Now you mentioned you had contact with a Japanese prisoner of war.
No, he wasn't Japanese.
Well, he wasn't Japanese.
No, he was an American soldier.
Oh, okay.
He was accused of, I think, from what I was able to find out, I think it was a mistake, but there were two fellows got a truck, and they were setting up a mobile brothel, I guess you'd call it. And, and he worked at a quartermaster company, and they didn't keep the best records in the world, and somehow or other, he was accused of it, and when the trial came up, they were speaking Korean or Japanese, whichever it was, and he didn't know what they were saying, so he just sat there. When they come up with a guilty verdict, he reached for, his word for his attorney was, he reached for justice. But I suspect that after he got back to the States, the serious cases like that, they really tried him in this country.
Okay.
They didn't try him over there.
So you think he probably...
I suspect it was a
came out
mistake.
okay.
I think so, but his name was Sherman Wade, and that was the last time I saw him was when I turned him over at Governor's Island.
How was that to be in charge of kind of shepherding a prisoner?
Well, actually, we had separate quarters. We had running water all the time. We didn't have to wait till the bell rang to take a shower or anything. And it was a cul-de-sac and rooms that went off of it. And I got a couple of sergeants assigned to me, and we do shifts. And I'd always ask him, would you like to go up, take a look, go up on the railing? And most of the time he said no. I think in the whole trip, he maybe got up 2, maybe 3 times, but I know the one time we were standing at the rail, and I had a 45 on my shoulder, and he says, Sergeant, he says, I couldn't shoot a friend. I said, is that right? He says, yeah. He says, could you shoot a friend? I said, well, put it this way. I've got enough points to get out of the service. I'm on the way home. What do you think would happen if you took off down this thing and tried to mingle with all the other troops? He looked at me and he says, reckon you shoot me. I said, you're right.
And he accepted the logic of
Oh,
your
yeah.
decision.
Oh, he was not, I was amazed that he would only go up for air as seldom as he did, but we give him his choice.
So you were drafted in 1944, began your service in 44, and you indicate you were in Seattle on VJ Day.
Right.
On the West Coast. Had you had any other overseas experience
No.
prior to going to Okinawa?
No. Okinawa was the first one.
Okay, so you were basically traveling around the United States in various kinds of
Training and, yeah, and schools
Okay,
and bingo.
and it was mostly in communications related.
At first it was, after basic training, went to a signal corps school where we learned to operate radios, high speed. Then went to Fort Jackson, and that's where we got the training as a company. And I'm trying to think, what was done there? Oh, after we got to Okinawa, how was it? We had a couple of typhoons, and the word got around that a congressional committee was going to come over and check and see why we had typhoons, who knows. But anyhow, I don't know that they ever came, but the company that I was in went through the records, and they found out that when I was working for the railroad, I could type and take shorthand. And the first thing you know, I'm working in the office of the Inspector General, taking testimony from whoever did wrong, and they caught up with them. I'll say this, you got royal treatment when you're with the IG, though.
Yeah, really?
Oh, yeah.
That's Inspector General.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So typing and shorthand skills came in very valuable in the military.
The first time they asked me about it, I said I'd rather not. But then the second time, they thought that apparently there was going to be a committee coming. And I said, well, if I don't have any choice, yeah. And it worked out all right.
Okay. Do you remember, were there any of those, did you come into contact with any of those congressional people?
No, I don't know that they ever really came, but
Okay.
the feeling, someone at least started the rumor that yes, they were coming. And I don't know that they ever did.
Okay.
And I don't know what they would have done anyhow. What are you going to do about a typhoon once it's gone? It's a hurricane here, it's a typhoon over there.
Yeah.
It damaged the Army in its wisdom when you got to Okinawa, took all the tents and lined them up like a surveyor, make them all real even, ignoring the fact that the natives lived in a little grove. They'd have a little cut in the middle of a grove of trees. Well, when the typhoons came, our tents blew out to sea, and the natives were there, and they were still having a little smoke coming up out of the thing. They were smarter than we were. Well, they'd been around, they lived that way.
Now, when you went to Okinawa, and again, it was technically after the war, and it was, what was your function? What was the military doing?
Oh, when we
Just
first
basically
got
occupying?
there weren't many, there may have been a few Japanese left. I'd heard that there was a couple, we didn't encounter one. We finally wound up with one. He was a bulky fellow, a farmer, and he was actually working in our office while by sort of, cleaning and things like that. Other than until we got an assignment, I drove a truck for a while, because I'd never driven a truck before. But it was, I don't think they knew what to do with us. We were just there.
Okay.
And the only thing that, I think the most surprising thing that happened to me one day, a friend of mine from Jacksonville, Florida, a fellow named Paul Burt, we were swimming. And I suppose we were separated by maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 feet. And all of a sudden, boy, I never saw such churning in my life. He turned around and he got out of the water. And after I got finished swimming, I went ashore. I said, what in the world did you get out so fast for? Oh, he says, I was scared. I said, scared of what? He says, I was swimming and all of a sudden all these bubbles came up underneath me. He says, I didn't know what it was. So that's when he got panicky and went off. I said, I want you to know how much I appreciate it. I don't know what it was under there. I said, but you made a lot of good time getting out, but you didn't say anything to me. I think what happened, there were a lot of wreckage around on the beaches, and probably something was rusty at that moment. It got loose and the air came up under it. Well, but when things happen like that, you don't use logic, you use your feet and your hands and you get away.
Now, when you went from Seattle to Okinawa, did you go by air or by
No,
ship?
no, we had a troop ship.
Okay.
And I think that was one experience that I'll never forget. We were going and a storm came up and everybody was buttoned up downstairs and all. And I found myself wondering what it would be like. What's it like? So I went up. I wasn't supposed to, but I went out the doorway and I looked and I couldn't imagine. You could look up and waves would be up like 50 feet high. And then in time, you're up there looking down. And this was a big troop ship. I couldn't imagine anything like that, but I saw it. And then I got back down below.
It was time to go below decks.
That's right. Didn't take all that long to see, but it's an odd sensation.
Did you cross the equator during that trip?
I think not, because I don't know whether they're going through the ceremony when.
Yeah, I was wondering if you did that.
I don't know. No. I've heard tales of it, but no, it didn't happen to us.
Yeah, I can recall my father-in-law, who was in the South Pacific, talking about when crossing the equator.
Oh, that's they make a big ceremony out of it.
King Neptune and Davy Jones and shaving heads.
You got it,
and
tradition.
all that kind of thing, but you didn't experience
No,
that.
that was a real ceremony, and apparently there was, but I imagine it was on the ships, not troop ships and whatnot, regular like destroyers, battleships and things like that, just all personnel, Navy personnel.
When you were in Okinawa, could you observe the aftermath of battle? Was it pretty evident?
Oh yeah, there wasn't much to see. The headquarters was a city called Naha, and the only way you knew you were in Naha, there were 2 rails, and they went up in the air, and that was all there was, period. And the air, we had air bases there, and when we left, there were an awful lot of airplanes just left, on the airfield. But there just wasn't anything really to see.
Okay.
There wasn't a whole lot left.
Now, you went into the military at, I'm guessing about age 21.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this: was there a girl you left behind?
No, we had a crowd, a real friendly crowd. We played baseball. We played football. We had parties. All the girls you wanted to bring were free. The guys threw a couple of bucks in the pot, and it was good. And you might get one girl, take her, and take somebody else home. It wasn't one of these everybody getting matched up kind of deals. And
so you didn't have to have a long distance romance with your childhood sweetheart.
No, didn't have one, and everybody went with everybody else.
Yeah.
I frankly, I liked it better that way.
Yeah.
I said they would get matched up so quickly that you never even looked around.
Yeah. Did you have any opportunities for encounters, social encounters in the military as you're moving around from place to place?
Yeah, there was went into town on a Saturday night. A fellow, I remember his name was Casimir or Renowitz. He was from New York. And
that's a good name.
Well, if you could spell. And we went into a hotel. I forgot the city down there now. It was outside Port Jackson, but we went in and we're just looking around, and there was a party going on in one of the big halls. And we walked in and sat down. Got to talking to a girl there and her mother. And other people started to come in, other GIs started to come in, and they wouldn't let them in, but they let us alone. And got to know the girl. And the odd thing was, my friend Casimir, he would take the girl out, and he'd tell me when they were going out, I would go in and the mother and I would have dinner together. Never insult the cook.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty good advice. Did you have opportunities for communication, letter writing back and forth between home and all the various places?
At home, rode home, and I assume the other brothers did too. But that was about the only communication there was, the letters to home. I didn't write letters to anyone else, anybody back in the crowd. Everybody was pretty much in the same boat.
Okay. Now, you said you had 3 brothers that were also in the military?
Yeah.
What were their military services?
Well, the youngest, the one next brother younger than me, he was in the Air Force and the program, I think it was called the V-12 program, and he was training to be a pilot, and he was training, still being trained when the need for pilots stopped. You know, the war was over, so I think they put him in a cooks and bakers thing or something. And all I remembered about that, he said one time the mess sergeant told him did he know what rice was? And he said, sure. He said, well, go fix the rice for so-and-so. And he figured he would use a cup of rice per person. And he said, here's the stove with these huge aluminum things like that. It looked like Niagara Falls. The rice is boiling over and coming down. And well, he didn't tell you.
So
you know,
a cup per person may be a little much.
It wasn't that case. Oh, yeah. And then the other 2 brothers were in the Navy. It was they were in the Air Force, Navy Air Force. And one got overseas, and the one that didn't get, and let's see, Oscar was the one that wound up when they didn't need pilots. He was the one that found out how to cook rice. Skeets, the oldest brother, he got overseas. They had I forgot the type of plane that could sit on the water.
Okay.
Got pontoons. And the brother who didn't make it back he was an aviation machinist mate, and there was a training flight from Masterfield, Florida towards Cuba. And the orders were to continue flying away from Masterfield, and they were to be reporting by radio every hour. And if for any reason they couldn't raise Mastersfield, they were to go keep another hour towards Cuba and then turn around and come back. Well, they lost communication, and to this day they've never known what happened. It was down at the Bermuda Triangle, nothing floating, nothing, and I read an account of the extensive search that they put into effect. Aircraft carriers have never found anything. They've never solved the things that go wrong in the Bermuda Triangle.
And that was your brother?
Yeah, that's the next older one for me.
If you don't mind talking about that, what was the impact in your family?
Well, strangely enough, when I got out, my mother she just wasn't the same. And I found out the reason was they thought they were sparing her, and they didn't talk about landing. And I did. And in time, she came around.
Okay.
She always had probably the secret hope that they would be somewhere on an island or whatnot, but that hope died. But no, I talked about him like I always did.
Yeah.
Called having a big mouth.
Do you remember any notorious characters that you encountered in the service, in the military service, and of course,
if they did,
Casimir Aronowitz it sounds like a pretty good one with that name, but
I don't really recall anything about personal relationships or anything like that. I know the oldest brother in the planes were just sitting there, they had them all tied together, and he got ready he said, I'm going to go swimming. And the guy said, you want to wait a minute? And he says, no, why? He says, you'll see. And the guy went and came out with a rifle. He said, go ahead. He says, that's sharks down there. He says, oh. But other than that, no world-shaking things. We were there to a large extent doing what everybody else did.
yeah.
And there were no cataclysmic things that occurred that I can recall, or that the other brothers did. Not, as I say, not everybody had a Sergeant York experience.
Well, no.
We were just there.
Yeah, out of the several millions that served in the military during that period of time, I guess you'd have to think probably the overwhelming majority of them had very kind of ordinary experiences.
You did what you were told. That's why things got done. I read somewhere where all the services together, and the waves and the wax and all that.
Wax.
I understand there were 12 million people involved in all the services.
Right.
Now, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now, 12 million people can't all have wow experiences.
Right.
If they do, it would be a more popular place to work.
Did you ever have any sense of the unpopularity of the war among people, or was there that kind of national unity that?
I think maybe because of the way it started, but
Yeah.
I don't ever recall having anyone beating the drum for going back to our philosophy before, just to keep our country and nobody. It was a job, it had to be done, and they realized the world was a little smaller than we thought. It just took a long time to get around it. But I don't recall, if anybody felt like it at that time, I don't think they gave voice to it, which probably would not have been a very popular reaction. But no, we were attacked, we defended ourselves, we won, the Japanese surrendered. It's a lot better than what's going on now.
Do you remember, we talked about Pearl Harbor, do you remember where you were, what you were doing when you heard that President Roosevelt died? Was that a memorable?
No. Pearl Harbor, yes. Roosevelt, no. I don't even know where I was. I honestly don't.
I can remember my father-in-law, he was out in the Pacific at that time, and of course that was toward the end of the European War, but there was still a lot of the Pacific War yet to go, and I can remember him expressing the thought that fellows thought after President Roosevelt died, they weren't sure that they were ever going to make it whole, which was a kind of a different kind of feeling.
Well, I can understand some people feeling like that because we didn't know. We weren't privy to, high policy and things like that. By the time you heard it had already happened.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the last time this country was involved, in, for want of a better word, a war, where we had a common cause, we knew what we were trying to do, and we went ahead and did it. And you take things like Vietnam and just the other ones, you wonder, what happened? Where did we go astray? We got off too many people getting killed, and we didn't win anything in Vietnam. But that's what we had some fellows going off to Canada. There was not the feeling then that there was for World War II.
Yeah.
Everybody was on the same page in World War II.
Did the military service, being away from home, being, traveling around, did it change any of your personal habits any? I guess I would ask, before you went to service, did you smoke?
No.
Did you smoke in the service?
Yeah. When you're a radio operator, and you got a headset on, and you've got your hands under a cover, and you're listening to code 50 minutes out of the hour, and you've got a 10-minute break. There's not an unlimited amount of things you can do. And start smoking, and I kept on smoking when I got out, not heavily.
Yeah.
In fact, I stopped smoking in 1968.
Alcohol?
Never a real item. Everybody drank some.
Yeah.
But no. Beer, when the fellows were all back after the war, the biggest thing then, everybody was getting married.
Okay.
You knew there wasn't a question of what you were going to do this weekend. It was who's getting married this weekend. And we found it. And of course, you always went to the reception.
Sure.
And we had a ball.
Yeah.
No shortage of parties.
Lots of card games?
No, they really didn't. I'm trying to think what we did. We drank a lot of beer. I didn't. Oh, later in life, a couple got together. But I guess the most card playing I've done, we had a poker club that got started, and that run 5 or 6 years, and that was good.
You don't remember a great deal of that while you were in the military?
Oh, they played cards.
Yeah.
I know I think it's when we were going on the way over to Okinawa, and somebody said, we play cards, I got a deck of cards. So we went down the steps halfway, and there was a clear area. They had a red light overhead. The guy shuffled the cards and he started throwing them out. He said, I got blank cards. The red light canceled out the red thing. Oh yeah, it was black items on the cards. That was a weird thing, which was also the end of the card game.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess so.
Yeah.
I've often heard it described in the military, particularly in combat, you know, that it's like an hour of absolute terror and then 23 hours of crashing boredom.
That's right.
And I guess you think that's then some of the things that would probably induce a lot of smoking or drinking or gambling.
One of the few things
to relieve the boredom.
You got to be careful when you're gambling because they have some Sharpies in the circle.
Okay.
And they're the ones that sent the money home. Yeah, but no, and you're right about boredom. There was a limited number of things you could do to occupy your mind, your body, and everything else.
You were restricted as to how you could move. You couldn't.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. We were pretty free in Okinawa. You know, there was no fighting there then. But we were in the States when most of the bad fighting was going on. But it wasn't continuous like you see pictures of World War I. Fellows in the trenches. It's hard to believe. What a way to fight a war.
Yeah.
Well, the atom bomb helped speed things up.
Yeah. Have there been any of the recent motion pictures that have portrayed World War II? I think of most recently Private Ryan. I
didn't see that.
And then there's one that's out now on Flags of Our Fathers. That's just a new one that's come out. Have you seen any films that you think may have done a particularly good job of portraying what it was really like?
Lord, I haven't seen a movie about World War II for so long. No.
Do you have a hard time watching those, or
no?
Do you think there are people who do?
The chief reaction I get from watching television is they're now doing remakes, and the remaking principals look like school kids to me. But it's like the things that they've done at first, they're the things you think were the best. And then when there's a remake with everybody new and all, you think, nah, it's not quite as good.
Yeah.
But they're remaking everything. They even redid Mutiny on the Bounty. And I don't know who took the place that Charles Lawton did, but it wasn't the same.
Did you have pretty good knowledge of, pretty good information of things that were happening in terms of the big events of the war, of D-Day, of like the attack in Iwo Jima, the flag raising? Did those kinds of things become known in the military?
Yeah, mostly when we were on Okinawa, we called it Radio Okinawa, and that's when they had that Pearl, the woman that played Tokyo Rose.
Tokyo Rose.
She just died recently.
Yes, I saw that.
And we got it. You didn't pay too much attention to Tokyo Rose, but we were pretty well informed. Maybe because we were studying radio too, I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
But it helps.
Yeah.
Your radio signals will go a long way.
Did you, were you aware of D-Day at the time, or you may not have been, depending on when you went in.
I'm trying to think.
D-Day may have already taken place.
I'm trying to think when, I don't think, I was in like 24 or 26 months. I honestly don't remember now. I honestly don't.
Do you think most of it, was your training more oriented toward the Pacific?
Actually, we weren't trained for an area. We were trained for a job or a skill or a...
So you could have gone anywhere?
Oh, yeah. If you need radios, wherever they needed the information, and especially in the units that have been formed just for that. No.
In the kind of work that you were training for, was it considered to be, if you actually got into the point where you were doing it, was it considered to be dangerous? Was it considered to be combat
The
or close
closer
to
you
combat?
would, well, the closer you would get to the front, wherever the front happened to be, but there's not too much danger if you're sitting back at battalion headquarters or corps headquarters or something like that. You did the same job, it just wasn't hazardous the further you got away from the fighting. But you get a couple of fellows sitting up there in a little trailer. Oh, that is, if you took a bunch of seats like that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 chairs, and yay wide and long, and you put that down, had all the equipment already in it. But if you were in a squad when Okinawa was, you know, when they were fighting on Okinawa or Iwo Jima or something like that, you bet your tail was dangerous. It can happen, but that's what they were training you for. They didn't train you for a danger level. You had a job, or they wanted to accomplish something. They got people together, they taught them what to do, and they used them, which is about all you can do when you're running a war.
Now, of all the big kinds of topics we've talked about, let me get to something that may seem kind of trivial. How was the food? How did you find the food?
I am probably the unpickiest eater ever spawned. They had, in the States there's no problem. We had big mess halls. And overseas they had some of the stuff that was already sea rations and whatnot. And once we had, I'm trying to think, they had a storeroom, and the rations and whatnot were stored there and whatnot. And a couple of us decided that it didn't seem fair that the food that we were getting wasn't quite as good as what the officers were getting.
Okay.
One of our fellows was on guard duty at that building open night. I thought, take a walk. So we helped ourselves to stuff. Oh, it was canned turkey and just better stuff that we were
At the
getting.
officers, right?
Yeah. And so we had put a floor on the tent, under the tent rather, as flooring. So we sawed a square, and we had like a little cache stand there.
Okay.
Put it down. And sure enough, they come around and go, you should have heard them. Then somebody took your rations. They raided that place, and it's just terrible what they're doing to you. And we all, oh, dirty dogs and all. They never found out who did it. And we didn't take a whole lot, but it was different. But they did pretty good. For the holidays, they had it just like you have in the States.
Okay.
They found a way of getting it there.
Yeah.
Turkey, I remember the menu on Okinawa Thanksgiving Day. It showed a fella, he was a chef, a cook. He was on the steps of the mess hall, and he's sitting there and he's got a cigarette in one hand, and you could tell he's been working 24 hours cooking, and he'd had his fill of food. He didn't want any more of that. And that was like the logo on the menu. I thought it was clever, because somebody was working hard. We just ate it.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever draw KP?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was in drafted, I was started off down in Fort Meade, Maryland. They didn't know what to do with us. You know, you're waiting.
Yeah.
Where they're going to send you, and you're taking tests or whatnot. And I was on KP duty, and we were sitting around cutting cakes that the guys had baked and getting them ready for chow. And there was a fellow there, and he had a white jacket on. And he says, bring me a piece of cake. I said, what are you talking about? He says, the stuff you're cutting, bring me a piece of cake. I said, oh, there's nothing wrong with your legs, come get it yourself. And he says, oh, me? He says, I'm the first sergeant, mess sergeant. I said, now you tell me. So he assigned me the next day to KP, and this time I had a mop, and it was a big hall, it was a big mess hall. And he said, every time somebody walks up and down, mop the floor. I said, all right, not hard duty. And I did it. And I went by one room, had a bunch of butcher blocks in there, and these guys were cutting meat up in, I guess, pieces that would fit into the big pans that they had. And this one guy had a T-shirt on, and he says, "Hey, you, pick that paper up." I said, "You mean that bloody paper?" "Yeah." I said, "Pick it up yourself. I didn't put it there." He said, "Well, I'm telling you, you better pick it up." And he started coming towards me. And I just reached down one of the blocks had a cleaver, and I said, "No." And he stopped, and with that, the sergeant came up. He says, "Now what?" I said, "This fella told me to pick up that stuff, and he threw down. You told me mop the floor, and I've been mopping that floor. There's not a footprint in it." "Oh," he said, "well," he says, "you better do it." I said, "All right, but I'm doing it because you told me, not because of him." But they were near misses, and
Yeah.
it wasn't not that important, because hadn't been in, I'd already been in the service like a week or something
Yeah,
like that.
okay.
And you're not used to somebody saying, "Hey, you do this, do that."
Yeah.
Good job. You learn.
Can you describe what it felt like when you were out?
You mean get it after I got out?
Yeah, yeah. When you got home?
When we got home, most of the fellas that got back, and as I say, it was a wedding every week and whatnot. Biggest thing was my mother's reaction to the one brother that didn't make it. And I remember we were up in the bedroom, and there was a closet and a coat there. I said, I used to borrow this from her. It was a green coat, and I put it on and whatnot. And she says, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I thought he was bigger than I was, but I'm filling this out now." She said, "Well, he wasn't as big as you remember him being." But other than that, life got back to normal. I would say probably parties more than anything else.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
Nice way to make up.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. But that's probably the roughest thing.
Did you get into your life's work pretty quickly after the war?
They let you, if you went back to the railroad, if you went in from the railroad and you went back, they gave your military service as continuous service, which was to help when I finally retired, because one of the, I'm trying to think what the formula was, they took your 5 highest years and then how much that was a month, then they took a percentage of that out of it, but then a multiplier was years of service. Well, my 24, 26 months of service was counted in that continuously. I'm glad I didn't mess with it.
Yeah.
Or going to work with something else.
Okay.
Yeah, went back and there was no problem. I think I went back the first day and the chief clerk said, "Mac," he says, you got to go up and get a clearance from a doctor." And I said, "What for?" He said, "Well, before you can come back to work, you got to see the doctor." So I went up, told him who it was, and they said, "I have to get a check." And he says, "Well, you feel all right?" I said, "I'm a little fuzzy." I said, "We had quite a party last night." I said, and he laughed and says, "God, back." And that was it was, I don't know what they were looking for, but there was nothing wrong.
Yeah.
No.
Did you take advantage of any of the veterans benefits,
No.
GI Bill or
No, could have.
VA loans or things of that sort?
No, when we came out, we bought a house and never lived in it. We were in our mother-in-law's house there in Baltimore. My wife and I bought a house so her mother could sell that house. But anyhow, when this transfer came for me to come back to Cincinnati, so we never lived in the house. But when we got out here, somehow the idea of a 30-year mortgage appealed to me like a hole in the head. And I thought, no. So we took one, I think it was a 17-year one. And I took out of our payday, we would keep some aside, and we're buying bonds. And then periodically we cash the bonds and put it on the principal.
Okay.
And so we got a clear title about 17 years, as I recall. But no, didn't do anything under the GI thing. Didn't have to at the time. One of the advantages of being poor in a neighborhood growing up, everybody's poor, you don't know it,
Yeah.
but it's a way of life.
Do you have any memorabilia, any artifacts of your military experience?
I don't even know where the ribbons were that they gave us. I don't know what happened to the uniform. Gosh, I'm trying to think. I can't think of a single thing which would be a memento of something that happened back, gosh, let's see, got out in 46? No, not a single one.
60 years. The reason that 60 comes so quick to me is I was born in 46, so.
But no,
I know it's 60 years.
I really don't know what happened to them,
Yeah.
but gave them to somebody or, I don't know, but I'm not a collector of mementos. Some people are.
Were you involved in veterans organizations after the war? Legion or VFW?
I think I joined not VFW, there's another one, for a while. But that got to be a sit-around thing and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I was back working, and I guess I got back to my normal lifestyle fairly quickly.
Pretty quick, yeah. Yeah. Well, are there any final kinds of memories or encapsulations that you'd like to put on this whole time that we've spent here together?
I would hope that the people who run this country think as though their policies at least should take into consideration that if they had sons and daughters that could be affected, what would be the most effective way of still being a country, but making a better one for their children. And if they can do that, they would have done their job. And if they don't do it that way, I haven't the slightest idea what's going to happen. I'm 83 now. If I get to be 100, I'll be surprised, and my friends will probably shoot me if they think I'm going to live that long. But I think there ought to be more thought given to where we're going and what's the best way to get there, and think we ought not leave our children with an unholy mess.
Mm-hmm.
And history will record whether that was done right or not.
That's true. That's the final verdict.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGowan.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed it a great deal.
Well, I haven't talked about the service for so long I can't remember. And it's been a while.
Well, thanks again.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.